Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me today. I like to talk about tropical houseplants. And today I'm going to continue on with the review series, and specifically, for the eagle-eyed amongst you, I'm going to be talking about the plant that is right in front of me, which is the Philodendron Florida Ghost. And I know I've done a couple of other videos on the Florida Ghost, and I'll see if I can link at least one of them up in the corner there. But essentially, this is going to follow on with the review series. And this is a series of videos that I've done. There's a playlist as well on the channel. You can check that out as well. It's a series where I've done reviews almost in the way that you might leave a product review on places like Amazon, because as far as I'm aware, there's not an awful lot of reviews on plants themselves, especially for people that have had the plants for a while. And a lot of the plants that hopefully I'm going to be showing in this review series, I should have at least had for about a year, if not longer. This one I've had for longer than a year, spoiler alert. But essentially the way that I like to structure these reviews is I will talk about some of the background of the plant, how the plant came into my care, some, again, background on how I found having this plant. Then I'll talk about things like availability. What was the availability like when I got the plant? Caveat here being that check the video date on this video, because I don't know when you might be watching this. It might be months later or years later. Some of these might not be, some of the availability data might not be applicable to that time frame. They're applicable right now. And I'll talk about things like pests. I'll talk about ease of propagation, speed of growth. I'll wrap up usually with some form of final thoughts and my score on the plant. And yeah, I encourage all of you, as I've always done with these videos, if you've got the specific plant from that video, drop a comment down below, talk about your experience, go into as much or as little detail as you want, because what I'm hoping will happen with these videos is that they will turn into a bit of a repository, basically, of information. So if somebody's coming to see the video, they can look at the video, hear about my experiences, and go down in the comments and hear about your experiences with having these plants in your care. And it doesn't matter if you've had this plant for a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years, 10 years. Put it down below. It will help people, because obviously the experiences that you have in that period of time will be relevant to that individual if they're in the same period of having or just about to get this plant. But yes, I think that's enough of the kind of groundwork. Let's go into the first topic. So background on this plant, and let me see if I can lift it up. It is a bit large and it's a bit heavy, and for the people that have seen my recent plant room tour, you'll know why I'm looking up. I'm always making sure that I'm not decapitating the plant on the ceiling fan. But you might be able to see I've got this in a net pot. It's in my aroid soil mix, and again, anything that I talk about that I've done other videos on, I'll try and see if I can link it up in the corner. And that corner, I don't know, I'm going to do the YouTube thing. I don't know which corner, I don't know if it's mirrored, but you'll find it. It'll be somewhere in the corners of the top. But yeah, so this plant, when I got it, it was probably only about yay tall. Probably only about 3 or 4 leaves, very, very small baby leaves. None, nope, I have got one, a tiny, tiny, tiny leaf that is still the original leaf. I don't know how much that's going to come up on camera, but you can see there quite how small it is. But pretty much all the leaves since then, and I'll put this down because it is a bit heavy, have come whilst I've had this plant in my care. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've definitely had this for at least 2 years. It might be a bit longer. Hopefully I would have put it on the title of this video so you would know. But yeah, I think if I remember correctly, with this plant, I got it from an eBay sale, basically. It was around the time when people were becoming a bit more aware of the Philodendron Florida Ghost. Even back then, there was the debate of the mint Florida Ghost, and I'm not going to bore you about this one. I have done other videos, and I'll link them, as I said. And I was quite fortunate enough to get this. It wasn't as available as it is right now, but I'll talk more about availability further down on the video. But yeah, I have to say, overall, and again, bit of a spoiler, it's been an okay plant to grow, but no kind of real storyline in terms of background. I didn't get it in the winter. I don't think I was getting it when it was spring, so it came over in the post in the UK. It was coming from a local seller, as in like local to the UK, so it wasn't coming from abroad. And I've always had it in an aroid soil mix. And I will always say this, and I have always said this about the Philodendron Florida Ghost, give it more light than you think it needs. Give it more light than you would normally give a philodendron. And that will help you with that ghostly white new leaves that everybody wants. If you give it less light, you will get the mintier leaves. So give it as much light as you possibly can. Just to give you an idea, with this plant at the moment, it's usually behind me right there. It's at the top of a shelf. It's getting southern light year round. Granted, I will say in the winter, in the summer, I do have a shade cloth. And again, I've talked about the shade cloths a bit more in my recent conservatory tour video, but it kind of helps dampen down that light. I would never put this plant necessarily in a scorching hot southern window in the summer where it might get burned to a crisp. But I will say I've never had an issue with burning so far with this philodendron. Granted, as I said, I've never put it in scorching light all day long. But I know generally this specific philodendron can take a lot more light than some others. But yeah, I think that's some of the background that I wanted to talk about. Let's move on to the next topic. So, speed of growth with this one. So this is an interesting one. This is a consistent grower. I wouldn't go as far as say this is one of the fastest philodendrons that I've got, although I will caveat that slightly and say when it was smaller, it did grow a bit faster. So when it starts to get slightly more mature leaves, like you can see here, and you might be able to see if I bring this in a bit closer, you can see all the kind of indentations, I'd say, from the veination on the back of the leaves, and you can see the back of the leaves there, and I'll see if I can bring it in a bit closer as well. You can see that there. And you can start seeing some of the lobes getting some of that serration, I'd say, on the side. And you can start seeing a bit more pronounced the top lobe of this. And if I turn this around, and I think most people will probably be aware of this at the moment, I would assume the name Florida Ghost is because you can see at the very top, right there where my nose is the head of a little human being, the top bits are the arms, and the bottom bits are like the little legs. And because obviously it's white, people are just like, it's ghostly. So I like that. I think it's kind of cute. But with this, when you're looking at things like the speed of growth, yeah, when it was younger, it grew a lot faster, as I've mentioned. As it's got older, it's consistently grown. I wouldn't say, as I said, I don't think it's the fastest thing, but it's not the slowest philodendron. It's just consistent. So I know if I don't mention this, people in the comments will be like, you need to be more specific. So I'll be more specific. If pothos, a golden pothos, a standard golden pothos in this environment grows 1 or 2 leaves in a month, this might grow 1 leaf in a month. But it will do that constantly, basically. Yes, you do get slightly more leaves in the summer when you get the brighter days, and they are much whiter. You can see now we're coming out of winter, so a lot of my leaves are a bit minty. So there's a bit more green on the white. But I mean, just to give you an idea, and I'll see if I can lift this up again, this leaf is probably about 2 years old now, and it's only just now started to go minty. This was brilliant white, as was this one. So it does take a while. My curiosity with this plant is piqued a lot of the times, because there was a point on this plant where I just had white leaves. I had 1 green leaf. I'm just like, how is it photosynthesizing and how is it staying happy? I still don't know the answer to that, by the way, but it somehow is. So I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to leave it. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about speed of growth is consistent, basically. Moving on to ease of propagation. And for the people that have got this, they'll probably agree with me in saying that it's relatively easy to propagate. I'll bring this up again so you can see. It does, at least my one, does freely give me some decent aerial roots. Not all the time, but enough that it makes propagating quite easy. I've only ever propagated the Florida Ghost in Leca with a water reservoir at the bottom, and it worked like a charm. I don't think I've ever propagated anything else. I'm trying to think. Maybe I did dampened sphagnum moss, and that worked really well. I don't think, and from what I've heard from other people, I don't think this is a particularly difficult philodendron to propagate. Obviously, light is key. Give it light. Make sure that it's got some humidity, and it will love life essentially and grow quite nicely. The one that I did in pond has done exceptionally well. It's already established itself. It's growing like mad. It's in a container with a water reservoir, and with most other philodendrons that I've got in the same types of pots, I might water them, I might refill that reservoir every 10 to 14 days on average. With the Florida Ghost that I've got, and granted I've got two cuttings in the same vessel essentially, it's almost to the point where I'm refilling the water reservoir every 3 to 5 days. So that gives you an indication. And it's interesting because when I've got it in my aroid soil mix, it's not one that saps up the water really quickly. One that I do have that dries out really quickly, even in a bigger container, is my Philodendron Malay Gold, or Lemon Lime, or Golden Goddess, I think some places have called it. That one, surprisingly, because it's a neon plant, and neon plants generally tend to be a bit slower and they tend to absorb water, I find, a bit slower. That one does go through its water quite quickly. But this one, interestingly, in the soil, it doesn't dry out too quickly, but in pond, it does sap it up really quickly. So yeah, there is that. So let's move on to the next topic. So moving on to availability. So this is an interesting one. Definitely desirable plant. It's not quote unquote rare as it might have been, or difficult to find as it was 2 or 3 years ago. I think there's a lot more of these available. I've seen these in some specialist plant nurseries, at least here in Europe and the UK. It seems like some of this is being propagated within the kind of traditional plant nurseries in the Netherlands, so it's kind of being released. The prices are still staying relatively stable. So looking back on when I got this plant, and as I said, it was at least 2 years ago, I think, if I remember correctly, back then it was either high doubles or kind of low to mid triples, and it did depend on how mature the plant was that you were getting. So I got mine with tiny little leaves, and it was very small and quite immature, and I think I paid high double digits at that point. I'm pretty sure now for a bit more of a mature plant with only a couple of leaves, you'd either be paying the same amount of money, maybe a bit less. So, and I don't think at the moment this is fetching, at least here in the UK and Europe, as high of a price range as kind of low to mid trebles. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I know that in other places of the world, this might still be a relatively expensive plant. But back when I got it, there wasn't that many people selling it, but it wasn't particularly difficult to find. I think when I was looking for it on eBay, there was at least 5 or 6 different sellers that had it. I went for the cheapest option because I'm cheap. But I think now if you search for the Florida Ghost in most places, it's a bit more readily available. And again, I am talking about my experiences here in the UK. I should have caveated that at the beginning of the video, like I normally do. This whole review is my experience, and it's biased to my experience in my growing conditions, in my environment. It very likely will be different where you are, basically. But yeah, it was not super difficult to get, but I think it's a bit easier to get these days. And I truly do hope that this becomes ubiquitous enough to be the next pothos, basically, and to be in plant stores everywhere. I truly do hope that for this plant, because it's so cool. Moving on to everyone's favorite topic, pests. Now, the interesting thing with this one, and I was hoping there might be one, I saw one a moment ago. Ooh, maybe this might get picked up. I don't know whether or not you're going to see that on the leaf, that little black thing that's moving around on the leaf. That is an ant. And ants are something that I've seen more frequently on my Florida ghosts, especially now we're getting into slightly warmer months. Can't wait for spring to properly spring. We had some like false starts because anybody who's in the UK knows we're going through the second winter now. We thought it was spring and kind of summer. No, we're going into the second winter again now. But, yes, the reason why there's an ant on this is because this is one of the plants that does get extrafloral nectaries. And again, I've done another video on extrafloral nectaries and I will link that above somewhere. But that basically will call in the ants like the cavalry and then basically kill off any pests. But generally with pests, when it comes to this plant, barring the occasional mealybug, and again, for the people that have been here for a while, I've been struggling with mealybugs for a while in this conservatory, this, for me, has been relatively pest-free. And I will say another thing about this, and I should have maybe mentioned this in the more beginning of the video. I've always grown this in relatively decent humidity. It's always been in plant rooms. But I also know from other people that this is one of the philodendrons that can grow quite happily in regular household humidity, if I'm not wrong. So I don't know, I can't speak to that because potentially in regular household humidity, if you're not staying on top of the watering too well, you might get the occasional spider mite, but I've never experienced a spider mite on this, touch wood. But yeah, I mean, pest-wise, relatively pest-free. Moving on to final thoughts. And I've got a few to say about this plant. So you might have already guessed with the level of excitement that I have for this plant, as most other people do. Definitely one of my favorites. Definitely one of my favorites. And again, I'll do the scoring thing that I usually do, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best. I'd probably give this a 9 or a 10, actually. That tells you something. And it was interesting because this wasn't a plant that instantly grabbed my attention. I could kind of understand why people are into it in terms of the morphology and how the leaves grew and all of these things, but I never quite got it. I thought it was interesting enough to at least give it a try, and I'm really glad that I did. And I've heard a lot of people that have had similar stories. They were just like, maybe. But I think pretty much everybody that I know that was, maybe, and then got the plant, this has become one of their favorite plants. And it's consistently one of their favorite plants, months or years later after they've had it. So that gives you an indication. For me, it's possibly one of my most easygoing philodendron. I'm not that pressed about getting the bright white leaves, although I can get them, as I said, with the bright light. But it's just consistent. It just keeps growing beautifully. Not an awful lot of pest pressures, as I've mentioned. It does okay in most of the soil conditions that I've given it. It doesn't have that much of an issue, as I've mentioned, based on other people's experiences with humidity. So for me, and this is the point that I was trying to make before, I really do hope this becomes almost a bit like the pothos. And I'm going to go on a limb here and say, out of a lot of even the common philodendrons that you can get in a lot of different plant stores, I think this has the potential to become a contender. As long as the prices, as long as it becomes a bit more available and the prices do go down. And I think that's the route that this plant is going in. Basically, this was never going to be an investment plant because it's so easy to propagate, because it's so easy going, and because it's a consistent grower. I think this has got the potential to becoming that next big heavyweight philodendron that we might see more consistently as a common house plant in plant stores. I really do hope that happens. I think a lot of people should experience this plant in their environment. It's very, very cool. It's an unusual shape. Maybe that's might be the reason why it doesn't, because it's a bit of an odd shape. It's maybe not for everybody. but definitely one of my favorites, and I think a favorite for quite a few people. But yeah, and I'll answer the other question that I usually do when we give the final thoughts is knowing what I know now. If I came across this plant, I didn't own it, would I get it? Hands down, try and stop me. Take my money, basically. Very, very cool plant. And yeah, just easygoing plant. Not particularly fussy, a steady grower. You get a bit of an interest because of that color difference. And even if you don't want the minty leaves, you can get this plant to a stage where it's got green leaves, fully green leaves, or slightly kind of like lighter green leaves and minty leaves and white leaves. And you just get this just awesomeness of different colors that are happening on this plant, depending on the maturity of that plant, depending on the light levels. Very, very, very cool. And I'm trying to remember now, I think this might have also bloomed for me at some point. I have had one or two of my philodendrons that I've obviously had for long enough. They're getting mature enough now. I'm starting to get philodendron blooms. Before people ask, I have not tried to essentially propagate via the inflorescences yet. Probably will happen at some point. I just need to find some good resources and I'll possibly give it a try and see what happens. I've done it with anthuriums and I've had success, so why not with philodendrons as well? But yeah, I think I've prattled on for far too long. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.